Jesuit Georgetown University seeks to make amends for a 190-year-old slavery act by taxing current students. Next on the Campus Roundup. Hello, I'm Dr. Duke, and this is the Campus Roundup at the College Fix. This week we are going to discuss why students at Georgetown may be forced to pay reparations for slavery. To talk more about this, we welcome Graham Piero, a reporter at the College Fix and a graduate of Georgetown University. Graham, this is a really interesting story. Obviously the Jesuit history of Georgetown going back 170 years was implicated in slavery. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about the slave connection in the history of Georgetown University?
Sure. So this has been a multi-year process that Georgetown has gone through. And to give historical background, in 1838, the university sold 272 slaves to pay off its debts. Basically, the university was in a ton of financial trouble at the time, and two Jesuits who were in charge of the university, Father McSherry and Father Mulledy, made the decision to sell off the university slaves in order to pay off these debts. And now Georgetown is trying to reckon with basically the fact that the university did hold slaves and did sell these slaves to plantations across Virginia and Maryland.
So now this new initiative to try to charge, I want you to explain that a little bit. They're going to charge a fee to all incoming Georgetown students, with a few exceptions, that would be used to do what exactly?
Sure. So right now, what GUSA, the Student Senate at Georgetown, did was pass a resolution that basically said that all students would pay a fee of $27.20, which is a reference to the 272 slaves. And this money, which estimates have it at about $400,000 total, this money would go towards a fund that would be run by some of the descendants and also some undergraduates to decide exactly what to do with it. Now, it is worth noting that GUSA has passed the resolution, but the next step is for the student body to vote on it now. So it's not 100% clear whether or not it will pass the student body. So it's not going to go into effect. It's not clear if it's going to go into effect just yet. But as of right now, the fee would be $27.20, and this would adjust with inflation and also make some exceptions.
Now, is this something that the students came up on their own, or is this in any way university supported?
So that's what's not clear right now, is exactly how the university, the administration, the board of trustees, the board of directors will react. But according to some reporting from Georgetown newspapers, this idea came about because a group of students this past summer visited with some families of the descendants. There's an organization called GU 272, which is an organization of the descendants of the slaves who were sold. And some students visited with these descendants, and this resolution came out of that sort of visit, where I think that many GUSA senators were talking about exactly how the student body can also contribute to the university's dealing with the legacy of slavery.
You mentioned the number $400,000. Is this a 1-year thing or 1 4-year cycle thing, or is this something that the students' plan would be every year forthcoming on a yearly basis, and the money keeps accruing?
So from what I understand, it's very similar to the student activities fee that Georgetown students pay. Georgetown students, I believe it was about $175 or $200 that they pay every year along with tuition to basically fund student clubs at Georgetown. So from what I understand and from what I've read of the reporting, it appears that this fee would be similar, where every year, adjusted depending on inflation or depending on financial aid, students would be paying it every year.
So if you are an African-American student, for instance, who is not on financial aid, will you have to pay that fee? And how can they guarantee that the right people are paying versus the right people who are more or less still oppressed by this?
Well, that was actually something that some of the reporting on the ground at Georgetown pointed out. Was a couple of the objections raised to the resolution would be that as of right now, there is language to make the fee, if you qualify for financial aid, you can get the fee waived, you can get it contributed to, but it would effectively tax descendants of these slaves who would get into Georgetown. So it's not clear if that is the language that they're going to go with, or if the resolution that's going to the student body for the vote will include this language. They very well could make some sort of exception for the descendants, but as of right now, it appears that the language of the resolution is indeed actually going to make some of these descendants pay the fee as well. Whether or not that will be the final version is soon to tell.
Graham, thank you so much for commenting on this really interesting College Fix article. We appreciate your time and your perspective today. Okay, now time to shift to Talking Campus, our weekly discussion with members of the College Fix editorial team. Today I'm joined by College Fix editor Jennifer Cabani to talk more about reparations for slavery at Georgetown University. Jen, this is a really interesting story. We got a great rundown of the who, how, and why this happened, but it's your story. Talk a little bit in terms of researching this story, the major points that stuck out to you about why this is such an important issue.
Well, essentially, what we're dealing with is students who want to take on reparations as a social justice cause, but is reparations really a worthy cause to take on? And does it make any sense?
Yeah, it begs the question, right? This is a student-led initiative. And if we allow students to decide that they're going to start taxing people under the name of these activities fees, I mean, where does it stop? I mean, we're dealing with a Catholic university, obviously, and a Jesuit university. The Pope is Jesuit. He oversees a Catholic church now that's struggling with a terrible, terrible sex abuse problem. Why wouldn't reparations potentially for victims of that be more immediate and relevant than going back to the 1830s to try to address those issues?
Absolutely. It's a slippery slope. Then there's reparations for people who suffer under the 1%, and there's reparations for people who are suffering from environmental damage. And I mean, it goes on and on and on. There's really no end in sight of people who could demand reparations.
You know, the other thing that's really interesting about the story is that the students, and I'd love to get your take on this, the students who are going to pay are going to be most of the student body except for kids already on financial aid. So if you're an African-American kid, right, whose family, distant family may have been slaves, but you're paying the full ride to Georgetown, theoretically you're going to have to pay reparations for what happened to your own race.
Theoretically, the ballot initiative doesn't address whether Black students who pay full tuition would have to pay the reparations or whether they would be exempt. Yep, students who are on financial aid are exempt. So it's an interesting question.
You know, if my kids went to Georgetown or your kids went to Georgetown, neither of our families got to this country until well after slavery was over. All four of my grandparents came in the 1930s. I know you have a similar story. Why would my kids be charged for this?
Yeah, my father immigrated to America from the Middle East in the 1960s, and on my mother's side, my great-grandmother immigrated from France in the early 1900s. So basically, I don't have any direct or indirect connection to antebellum slavery. So would I be exempt or my children be exempt if they went to Georgetown? I mean, there's just so many caveats you could sort of pick at.
Yeah, I love what you said earlier. I mean, at what point then does this not become an issue of taxing everything? Again, those of us who are heterosexual and the terrible crimes for the last 10,000 years we've perpetrated on people who didn't see sexuality the way that we did. It's a never-ending thing. You actually did a lot of work before you came to the College Fix with David Horowitz. And David Horowitz wrote a really interesting article called 10 Reasons Why Reparations for Slavery is a Bad Idea for Blacks and Racist Too. Talk a little bit about that work.
Yeah, well, it was a long time ago. Actually, I worked for him in 2001, so almost 20 years ago. And he put this out as a advertisement in campus newspapers back in 2001. And that was when I was working for him at the Center for the Study of Popular Culture in LA. And it created a huge splash. Students were furious at the ads. Some newspapers refused to run it. The ones that did faced a lot of backlash. But he was essentially trying to raise this argument with the students that reparations are just overall a bad idea and here's 10 reasons why. One of the ones I find most interesting is his argument that there were actually Black slave owners in the antebellum South, over 3,000 Black slave owners. A lot of young people actually don't know that there were Black slave owners in the South, and it's news to them. I recall you have quizzed your students over the years, and they think America actually invented slavery, which is obviously ridiculous.
Yeah, overwhelmingly, my kids, over the last 7 different universities, my kids overwhelmingly, whether we're talking the South, the Midwest, the East Coast, they are convinced that slavery is primarily, exclusively an American problem. Many American kids don't realize that Native Americans owned slaves, even some up to and after the Civil War. This is a very complex issue, and I don't know how you get around. This is where intersectionality comes in, right? Progressive progressives realized that different liberal constituents were starting to fight with each other. Who's a greater victim, the black male or the gay female? And so they invented intersectionality, which now basically says whatever fights we have amongst ourselves, it's all white guys' problem.
One of the other ones in David's list of 10 that I think always is worth noting is that 300,000 soldiers died in the Civil War to free the slaves. And the Republican president, Abraham Lincoln, obviously signed the Emancipation Proclamation freeing the slaves. And we fought a war to free the slaves. So, we definitely have paid with blood and with hardship to right that original sin of America.
And it was Western culture, it must be reminded, that was the first across the board to outlaw and make illegal all forms of slavery. And so the idea here that Western culture is exclusively responsible for this is, as you say, it's very problematic. Please follow up on this. I know that the student body is going to vote on this initiative, and then the university is going to have to weigh in on if they do accept it, how it goes. This is a really critically important story, so keep us informed on how it goes coming up. All across the country, woke college kids are going out of their way to demonstrate how much more woke they are than the woke professors who've been teaching them for the last 3 and 4 years. And to do this, they have to become more radical. So students at the Georgetown University, Jesuit University, are now considering giving an added fee, a tax, if you will, added activity fees to make up for and pay reparations for what Georgetown's Jesuit College did 200 years ago. The problem with this is, where does it end, as Jen pointed out? We have a situation now where heterosexuality has been the norm for 10,000 years. And by definition, according to activists, heteronormativity has been a huge drain and bigotry leveled against people of alternative sexualities. Are we going to have to pay reparations for that? What if you are economically behind the curve? What if you're not part of the top 50% of earners in this country? Are we going to have a reparations tax for that? When you start letting kids decide to demonstrate their wokeness with these kids' utter lack of historical context, utter underdeveloped critical thinking skills. We know that universities are choosing politics over critical thinking now. When does this end? And when you're paying $60,000 to go to Georgetown as it is, and mom and dad are going to have to pick up the bill for that, or the federal government through student loans, what are we really trying to help here? Is it worth the cost of showing our progressive bona fides to engage in this kind of silly, often irrelevant behavior? And that's the Final Fix. Be sure to stay up on all the latest news and information from the College Fix by joining us on all of our social media platforms. For the Campus Roundup, I'm Dr. Duke, and we'll see you next time.